for the black families and estimated a second time for the white families. So we have race-specific regressions. So we've got one regression that's with the black families and another regression that's with the white families. And then use both of those sets of results to predict what's the likelihood of the typical family using credit. So the typical family is the one whose income, wealth, age, and so on is the mean, the average for that race group. So figure out what's the average income for the white families. It's in table 3. What's the average wealth for the white families? What's the average wife's age for the white families? Figure out those same averages for the black families. And then use the estimated coefficients from those two race-specific regressions to predict, multiply this times that, that times that, that times that, that times that. Actually, let the computer do it, say predict. To predict what's the expected, in this case, likelihood of using credit for the black families and for the white families, and then compare those numbers. Now, so far that's not terribly interesting. What's terribly interesting is when what we do is we take the coefficients, so the estimated coefficients with those t-stats on them, we take the coefficients from one race group and multiply those by the means from the other race group. And that's doing what's called the Blinder-Wohlhacke, well, it's the Blinder-Wohlhacke method or the Blinder-Wohlhacke comparison, because these are the two economists that came up with this idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a predicted likelihood of using credit. And one time we're going to take the estimated coefficients, so they call those beta hats, so beta with a little caret hat on top. We're going to take the estimated coefficients for the white family, so W for white, and we're going to multiply that by the average values of the right-hand side variables, the x's, for the black families. So we're going to take the estimated coefficients, that's the beta hat, for the white families, and multiply that by the means of the variables for the black families. Then we're going to do the same thing again, but now we're going to use the estimated coefficients for the black families times the means of those variables for the black families. That's the second column, the middle column. And the third piece we've got, and I'm doing this backwards from the table, but there you go. The third piece is do this for the white families. Change my ink color for kicks. And I take the estimated coefficients for the white families, multiply that by the means for the white families. That's the first column. Comparing the second and the third columns, the second column is saying the typical black family, because we're using the means for the black population. And so the characteristics, that's captured by the means. So we're going to take the typical characteristics, the typical black family, and we're going to treat them as if they're white. So the treatment is captured by the coefficients. So if we take the means for the black families and we multiply those by the coefficients from the white families, we're saying let's look at a family that in all respects is the typical black family, but let's treat them as if they're white. And let's see what the predicted likelihood of them using credit is. And then we'll compare that with what we would get if we took this typical black family and treated them as if they were black. So we're going to take the means for the black population and multiply them by the coefficients from the regression with the black population. If those two results are about the same, so if treating a black family as if they're white and treating a black family as if they're black, if those two results are about the same, if there's virtually no difference between the predicted likelihoods of using credit, then it means there's probably no racial discrimination going on there. That the difference in the observations, in our case installment credit use or merchant credit use, that the difference in the observations are due to the differences in the characteristics, that is the differences in income and wealth and age and family size and so on. So when the second and third columns are approximately the same as they are for installment credit. For installment credit, when you do this, treat the black family as if they're black in the middle column, treat the black family as if they're white in the third column. You get essentially the same number, 77 versus 79. Very different than what you get with the white characteristics, which is 25. And that tells you that the difference in the use of installment credit by black families is due not to the fact that they're black and they're being treated differently because they're black. It's due to the fact that their characteristics are different, not their demographic characteristics, but their income, their wealth, their family size, the age of the wife, and so on. On the other hand, second row, with a merchant credit, if you take the typical black family, so the average value of income, wealth, age, and so on and so forth, and multiply that by the black coefficients, you get the likelihood of using credit is 15.8%. Take that same exact family and change one thing about them, and that's their skin color. The only thing you change is their skin color. Take that exact same family and change their skin color. That is, treat them as if they are white, and what do you get? Double. Twice as big. 30% likelihood of using merchant credit. The black families are using merchant credit much less often because of black. Not because of lower income, not because of lower wealth, not because of the difference in age, but entirely because the black families are being treated differently than the white families. Yeah. Yeah. So what this does is it allows every one of the variables in the regression to have a different effect, to have a different slope, including and allow for difference in the intercept. But you no longer have the dummy variable because you have these race-specific regressions. You don't want, there's an intercept in each equation. You're just not, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm not going to look just at the relationship between the dependent variable and one of the many independent variables, but you're going to let this relationship between these variables vary between I can't draw in 40 different dimensions, right? So I'm going to let the relationship between the use of credit and every one of those independent variables be different for blacks than it is for whites. So I'm not going to restrict any of those coefficients to be the same. Yeah. So then the question is, how come? Why might there be this marked difference between the two types of credit? These are two types of credit that most economists lump together. Most economists, when they talk about credit and consumer credit, they put these things together in one pile, and they don't pull out this distinction between the installment credit and the non-installment forms of credit. So the argument that I offer is that the difference is due to collateral, that the installment credit, the good being purchased, served as collateral, and that with the merchant credit, the only collateral was your word, or your promise that you would repay. That in the extension of merchant credit, there's a role for race and discrimination in the extension of credit by largely white merchants to black families, and that discrimination is overcome by the existence of physical collateral, a washing machine, phonograph, a piano, that can be repossessed if the family fails to make their payments. One of the implications of that is that black families at the turn of the century could not count on merchants extending credit to them if they were in an emergency. When do you need this merchant credit? One of the times you need it, and a lot of this is for funerals and doctors, you need it when somebody is sick, an unexpected event, or you need it when somebody dies, often an unexpected event. So if the black families couldn't rely on the merchants to extend them credit in the case of emergencies, they're going to need to save up so they could provide these emergency needs on their own. And from the same data set, I look at the saving rates by race. The yellow line is the white families, the blue line is the black families. This is particularly a problem with the low income, and what you see here is at the low levels of income, the black families have a higher saving rate than the white families do. Perfectly consistent with the explanation. That you would expect to see the black families saving more and saving more often than the white families. So the first piece looks at the saving rate, what share of income is being saved, and indeed the low income black families are saving more than the low income white families. And the second is, how often do people save? What's the likelihood of being a saver? And there again, you see that the low income black families, the blue line, the low income black families are more likely to be savers than the low income white families. That when you cannot rely upon credit to provide your emergency needs, there's a greater need, and therefore, in this case, apparently, a greater likelihood of what we call precautionary saving in advance. Most of the merchants are white. Yeah. I don't have numbers on it. I have studies on grocers, and most of the grocers are white. There's some black grocers in some communities, but it's pretty rare. The funeral parlors, there's some black-owned funeral parlors, and in fact, what you get is you start to get, there's a whole literature that's done on funeral parlors in the black community because you get the development of black-owned funeral parlors, both for discriminatory reasons because the whites didn't want to use a funeral parlor that had been used by black, and also for these credit type reasons as well. Yeah. So this is why I've moved away from calling it merchant credit. Particularly in the class, I've already talked about merchant credit. The merchant credit, when we talk about sharecroppers, there we're talking about mostly feed stores and think like Home Depot for agriculture, but smaller. And the credit that they're getting is they're buying their seed. They're buying later in the years. They're buying fertilizer, not in this period, not fertilizer yet. They're buying other supplies that relate to the planting of the crop. And in that case, there is some collateral because the collateral is the crop. It's not that they are giving the family credit to the family without any sort of promise of income coming in. But in this case, in the sharecropper's case, there's a crop. Right? There's a crop, that's the cotton crop. The owner of the farm is going to get their share, and then the merchants that are extending credit to the sharecroppers were able to write crop liens, so L-I-E-N-S, or L-E-I-N-S. I'm not sure which one, actually. Doesn't matter, but it's not L-E-A-N-S. It's the one with the I's instead of the A's, which is a legal document that was recognized by the courts that said that the merchant had the right to claim part of the crop. So there was a physical collateral. Yeah. Other question? Yep. I think the argument in terms of why this switches back is that the difficulty in obtaining credit was particularly for the low-income families. So the higher the income, the more likely the black families were to be able to obtain credit. And so if your ability to get credit rises with your income, then your need to save falls with your income. So why do they crisscross? So my understanding of it is that the discrimination is going to be experienced particularly by the low-income black families and not by the low-income white families. So the low-income white families are able to get credit from these merchants. The low-income black families cannot. The high-income families, regardless of race, are able to get the credit. I don't know if that ever answered your question. So that's your question. Okay. So is your question why up here are these not coincidental? Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I do know that it's a question that has been researched forever. And because most of the research on racial differences in wealth accumulation, so saving, have focused on this difference up here, on the fact that white families tend to have higher saving rates and therefore higher rates of wealth accumulation than black families. And there's a huge, rich literature on that and no consensus at this point. There's a whole host of possible explanations that people have offered, and it's still a very active field of research. That there's a whole, there's the National Economics Association, which is the association of black economists, and a lot of people in that association are involved in this, not exclusively in that association. But it's an active field of research, and there's no consensus yet around the explanation. It's cool stuff, though. Okay, all right. The interwar years. So we're going to talk about credit again when we talk about the Great Depression. But what I need to do now is I need to set the stage for you for the Great Depression. So when we talk about the interwar years, we're talking about the period from 1919 to 1941. One of the things to keep in mind is even though now we're going to start talking about macro in the kind of sense that we talk about in Econ 1 and 100B, the data that we have for the interwar period, such as what you played with for the problem set, a lot of the aggregate data that we have is all has all been created since that time. So the notion of the unemployment rate, that to be unemployed, you have to be a member of the labor force, you have to be out of work and looking for work. That definition of unemployment comes after the Great Depression. They didn't have that definition during the Great Depression. The concept of gross domestic product or gross national product, that idea, nobody has thought of that idea yet at the beginning of this period. Nobody's had the idea of trying to figure out one number that equals the total amount of goods and services produced in the economy. Nobody's even had the thought of the total amount of goods and services produced in the economy. Those concepts and those measurements come later on in this period. So when we're looking at aggregate data, I'm going to show you some aggregate data, we need to take it with a grain of salt. So draw a thick line on these things because there's a margin of error around the data. Even with the margin of error around the data, we still get a pretty striking story. There's also no cohesive, agreed upon economic model at the time. I would argue there is now, but others would disagree. So at the time, 1919, first off, the word macroeconomics has not been invented yet. There is no word macroeconomics until John Maynard Keynes starts to do his work in the 1930s. It's not a word. Economics meant microeconomics. We didn't have microeconomics as a word and macroeconomics as a word. We just had economics. So the whole concept of the macroeconomy, having a story about what determines what goes on in the macroeconomy, none of this is there. 1919, John Keynes' general theory is published in 1936. So the way that academic work goes, it's published in 1936. These are ideas he started walking around and giving seminars on. 1931, 1932, 1933, 34. Takes a sabbatical, writes a book, gets a publisher, edits it, gets it out, takes a while. So it's after the Great Depression starts is when he starts working up these ideas that become the general theory. I'll also put down here at the bottom just to remind you who the various presidents are. I don't know, Wilson doesn't become important. Harding I didn't even know was in there, so there you go. I didn't. Silent Cal. Cal Coolidge, he's president during the boom of the 1920s. Herbert Hoover, so Hoovervilles, and we want to thank you, Mr. Hoover, is president from 29 to 33, so he gets to oversee the collapse of the economy. Franklin Roosevelt is inaugurated in March of 1933. Yep. The classical model goes back to the principles from the 1890s, which are the marginal principles, which is what started what we now call microeconomics. So all this marginal benefit, marginal cost, marginal revenue, marginal utility, marginal whatever the heck you want, except marginal propensity to consume. That line of thought starts in the 1890s, and that's the classical school. Yes. Yeah. So the classical model of the macroeconomy is just micro. Yeah. Okay. A little bit of macro just to make sure we're all on the same page. Businesses hire people if it's profitable to do so. They're not going to hire people if it's not profitable to do so. They don't give you a job just because they like a pretty face, unless they're weird. Profit maximizing businesses. There we go. Profit maximizing businesses hire people because it's profitable to do so. So unemployment is going to depend upon how much output is produced. I got into economic history because of the Great Depression. My parents started high school in 1929 and graduated in 1933. So these are stories that I grew up with, stories about the Great Depression. When less output is produced, fewer people are going to have jobs. The amount of output we measure with GDP, the amount of output that's produced depends on aggregate demand, CIG, exports and imports. The C is consumption spending, which is done by households. The I is investment spending, which is business spending for three things. What are those three things? Changes in inventory holding. Colin, I heard you. Residential investment, so that's a subset of structures or buildings. So inventories, buildings, and break it out. Don't call it capital, because I don't know if you know what you mean when you say capital. I would feel better if everybody had thrown these answers at me really quickly. Machinery or equipment. Investment spending, spending by businesses for machinery or equipment. Structures, which includes both residential and non-residential structures, so houses, apartment buildings, factories, and stores. And changes in the value of inventory holding. Is that water? Mine too. Good. G. What levels of government? Federal, state, and local. All right, so all three. So federal, state, and local government spending is included in G. Does it include transfer payments? Yes or no? No. Good. Exports, EX minus IM. Exports minus imports. Exports, goods and services produced here that are sold to people who reside in other countries. Doesn't matter where it's actually sold. Imports, goods and services produced in other countries, consumed by people who reside in the United States. Doesn't matter where it's really sold. Consumption depends primarily on take-home pay or disposable income, on wealth. Might depend on interest rates, might not. Depends upon whether we've got a preponderance of borrowers or savers in the economy. Depends upon confidence and expectations for the future. Investment interest rates matter. The availability of funds matters. Expected profitability of the project matters. All right, quick overview. I'm going to show you 30 slides that back this stuff up. So this is what we're going to see. So I'm not going to explain each of these, but this is a list. This is like an outline of what's coming. So output's in the 1920s. Great decade. A couple of little baby dips. Nothing to worry about. Great decade. Output was growing. Unemployment was low. Capacity utilization was high. Prices were steady. The stock market was booming. Businesses were failing. Kind of a problem. Housing construction peaks in 1926. Fascinating parallels between housing in the 20s and housing most recently. The income distribution more uneven. Big surge in consumer installment debt. 1930s. When we talk about the Great Depression as the decade of the 1930s, the Great Depression, that phrase refers to the whole decade. But remember, a recession is when real GDP is going down. So the economy is in recession according to the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, which has the Business Cycle Dating Committee. Everybody, all economists want to date a business cycle. The business cycle dating committee. It's a committee of like 6 people that date when business cycles begin and end. Give the dates. So they say that the downturn began in August of 1929, that we hit bottom in March of 1933. Some people, looking at the kind of data you looked at for problem set 2, have said they think the bottom was actually June of 32. So some of those series that you looked at hit their minimum much earlier than March of 33. So they went down like this. Then there's a recovery. So recovery doesn't mean recovered. Recovery means output is going up. Recovery is dated March 33 to May of 37. There's a double dip. So there's a second dip, May of 37 to June of 38. And then the economy continues in recovery June of 38 to December of 41. We mark December of 41 as the end of the recovery because that's when the economy finally gets back to previous peak. So it's called the Great Depression. In the same sense the decade we're in right now is going to get a name. It's the Great Depression not because we're going down for the whole decade, but because it takes a decade to get back to previous peak. It's going to take us probably a decade to get back to the previous peak from 2007. I mean, we're already more than halfway there, right? The 2007 downturn started in June of 2007. We're coming up on the 6-year anniversary. We're still at 7% unemployment decade. Okay, what happens from 29 to 33? The economy bottoms out. Output falls a lot, unemployment rises a lot, capacity utilization falls a lot, prices fall a lot, banks fail a lot, stock market fell a lot. Everything went to hell in a handbasket, as my grandma used to say. I could have downloaded lots more pictures and shown you the movie, but I didn't. So these are pictures that I think are in our textbook, and you can find lots of pictures online. So I didn't take time to do that. You know, bread lines, that's a pretty iconic picture of people standing in line to get food. So it's sort of like the food project. I don't know which church is doing the dinners these days, but it's like the line you see there, but bigger and thicker and longer. Shanty towns, so these are the Hoovervilles. These were built, is this one? Oh, this is in Central Park. Oh, yes, of course, there's Central Park. So this one is in Central Park. So Hoovervilles were shanties, shacks that people built, named Hoovervilles for President Hoover. So we'd like to thank you, Mr. Hoover. You made us what we are today. Okay. So just a little picture in terms of how big each of these components of demand are. This starts in 1930. We don't yet have the data to push it back, so there's a couple of economic historians that are working to develop the data to push this back to 1900 or 1910 anyway. But starting here, I like my pen better. Starting in 1930, consumption is the biggest part of the economy. So consumption, 1930, 80% of the economy. Investment, these days around 10, 12, 15%. Same thing then. So there's not, when I look at this chart, other than picking out World War II here, where consumption was constrained by rationing and government spending went way up for the war effort, there's not a lot of difference between the way the world is today and the way the world was in 1930. So consumption is 2/3 or more of spending. Government is 15 or so percent. Investment is 15 or so percent. Net exports are basically nothing. Let's look at